Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome member of the Board of Trustees of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute, Andrew Littlefair.
Good morning. Throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, successive presidential administrations have had to adapt to the changing nature of security threats. They've had to build and rebuild the nation's war-fighting technologies to stay on the cutting edge. Some played catch-up. Others, like President Reagan, tried to move the country ahead of the curve. But by and large, that build-up and those strategic advancements were the purview of the Department of Defense, or its predecessor, the Department of War. Today, the U.S. Department of Commerce is helping lead the way in the decades to come to ensure that America has the technology to compete, to defend itself, and to project strength. Much of this, of course, is because of the central role that semiconductors and other advanced technologies play in modern life and modern warfare. A reliable and resilient semiconductor industry that protects America's technological leadership is essential for our country's prosperity and security. And so the Bipartisan CHIPS and Science Act put the Commerce Department in the middle of our national security apparatus. As Secretary Gina Raimondo has embraced this new role and with an unmatched drive and enthusiasm. Indeed, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin now calls Secretary Raimondo his battle buddy. And Secretary Raimondo has said she is connected at the hip with the national security community. She is charged with leading the disbursements of CHIPS and science funds, while also navigating export controls to ensure that American technology does not find its way to the Chinese Communist Party. And now Secretary Raimondo faces a new question. With the upcoming transition in Washington, what can be done to ensure continuity to the policies that keep America safe and strong? Please welcome back to the RNDF, the 40th U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Gina Raimondo, and our moderator, Ms. Jennifer Griffin, Chief National Security Correspondent for Fox News.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Well, I'm honored to be here with you, Secretary Raimondo, 40th Secretary of the U.S. Commerce Department, also known as the CHIPS lady, fondly. I wanted to start with some fun facts about semiconductors that I think were a little surprising to me. Did you know that 150 semiconductor chips are produced every year for every person on the planet? That is 1 trillion chips produced a year.
Yeah.
And
growing.
And growing. The U.S. used to produce 100% of the world's semiconductors, and now it's just down to 8%. You obviously have set a goal to change that. Talk to me about how you have transformed the Commerce Department. What has changed since you took over?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody, and thank you for having me. Fundamentally, we have modernized the Commerce Department and broadened its mission so that it is a critical part of the national security apparatus of the U.S. government. And the reason is because that's what's necessary to meet the threat. So today, more than ever, national security requires technological security, requires the United States to lead and have a lead over all of our competitors in technology, particularly in AI and semiconductors. It requires secure supply chains. Make no mistake, we cannot be the greatest country and the most secure country on earth if we are reliant upon a single company in a single country for semiconductors, a particular critical mineral, particular component, particular chemical. So in my tenure, we have fundamentally recognized that national security, technological security, economic security are linked. And so now the Commerce Department is a more muscular, modernized agency centrally positioned in the national security work.
And you were the first Commerce Secretary to be invited out to the Reagan Defense Forum. So that says a lot about the centrality of the Commerce Department to national security. Now, you also have been put in charge of handing out basically $53 billion for the President Biden's signature bipartisan legislation, the CHIPS and Science Act. How much funding has gone out the door? How many grants have you given? And how many chips are being made in the US right now as a result of this legislation?
Yeah, thank you. So as I look around, I see Tom Caulfield, I see a bunch of people from the companies that have received CHIPS funding. By the end of the year, so quickly, $39 billion is for the company incentives, and then $11 billion is for the research. And I don't know if Senator Todd Young is here, but he was a huge leader in the research and development piece of the CHIPS bill. By the end of the year, of the $39 billion, we will have obligated about $35 billion into 26 companies, and almost all of the $11 billion for research and development. So we're getting the job done. Most excitingly for me, when I started this, people said, you're never going to get TSMC to expand in America. Right? Just for all of you probably know this, but TSMC is a Taiwanese company, currently makes 100% of the world's most sophisticated leading edge chips. You want to talk about NVIDIA? All their chips are made at TSMC, all of them. People would say to me, you're never going to get TSMC to expand in the United States. Wrong. They're doing it. You don't believe me, they're doing it. TSMC, under the leadership of this president and the Commerce Department, is building out 3 new huge facilities in Arizona to produce the world's most sophisticated semiconductor chips in America with American workers. It's an incredible thing, and you're all safer because of it. We've invested with Micron, Global Foundries, Texas Instruments, SK, Samsung, all the leading companies. As you said, Silicon Valley down the road is Silicon Valley because we invented the chip. We took our eye off the ball. We've gone from making 40% of the world's chips to less than 10 and none of the leading edge chips. That stops now. TSMC right now is making leading edge chips at the same yield and quality as they're doing in Taiwan. So anyone who says Americans can't do it is dead wrong.
But it's not been completely smooth sailing.
No, it's been anything but smooth sailing.
Let's be real here.
Yeah.
Why has it been so hard to give money away? What are some of the workforce issues that you faced?
Yeah.
Regulatory issues?
Yeah. Well, it's been brutally difficult. So first of all, although $39 billion is, of course, a lot of taxpayer money, every single CEO that I met with, and I negotiated most of these deals, you got to get into the weeds. The conversation, they would come in and say, Secretary, we think we need X as a subsidy to do what you want us to do. And I would say, you'll be lucky to get half of that. Thus ensued a long negotiation. For the $35 billion that we're allocating, the private sector is investing $500 billion. So it's huge. Thank you for saying that. Audience feedback. So if you want to do it right, we set out to say, we had national security goals. There's a national security program. We said at the end of these investments, by the end of the decade, we want to be making 20% of the world's leading edge chips in America. We want to have leading edge memory in the United States. We had leading edge packaging in the United States. We had goals. And so we drove a hard bargain with every one of these companies. But we're going to get it done. And it's like 10 to 12x private sector investment for every taxpayer dollar. Workforce needs are really an issue. If you say to yourself, what do we have to do to secure America's national security? Workforce, workforce, workforce. We've got to invest in it. Research and development. Students coming out of colleges, community colleges and high schools need to be ready to work in tech fields, in science fields, and in manufacturing. And it matters deeply. You want to make ships again in America? You need Americans who know how to make ships, war ships. You want to make chips in America? You need to have Americans to do it. So it's a huge piece of the puzzle.
What are the flaws in the CHIPS Act that you think need to be addressed?
It's a great question. I think over time, you will need more funds to continue to build this out. By the way, to put this in perspective, right now, China is building 21 new semiconductor fabs. And they're going to keep going. Like, China is a worthy competitor, and we better be serious about it. So I think over time, and I am not a person who likes to spend taxpayer money. I was a governor. I watch every penny, which is why I negotiated these deals. But you have to invest in our future. We have to continue to invest in AI and research and development and job training. So there'll need to be more. Look, I think we got to get serious about permitting reform. It can't take 2 years to go through permitting in order to build a factory. That is not competitive. If China says they want to build a new fab, they don't take 2 years to go through permitting, federal, state, local level. So I think there's a number of different things to clear out an underbrush of bureaucracy, to enable us to move faster, and just to have a closer relationship between technology, entrepreneurs, and leadership in the private sector with the government.
Let's talk about Intel. Earlier this week, the CEO of Intel was forced to step down. Its stock price has tumbled. Intel is the only U.S. company to design and manufacture leading-edge chips in the United States. It was supposed to receive the largest grant under the CHIPS and Science Act. It's central to your strategy. How big a blow is this to your efforts to return chip manufacturing to the U.S., and what are you going to do about it?
Yeah. So look, there's no secret. Intel has struggled, right? It has momentum now. I think its new technology is on its way, and they're taking a lot of the right steps. The board chose to replace the CEO. That's their decision. Look, anyone who's a semiconductor executive in here knows it's a brutally competitive industry. It is famously cyclical, and sometimes changes in leadership happen. But Intel is an important American company, and we need to get behind it to succeed. So we're backing them. I believe they will come out of this. And although you're correct, it's an important piece of the program, we have a portfolio. You know, right now there's only one company in the world who has proven it can manufacture leading-edge chips, and that's TSMC. And now they're doing it on U.S. soil. So we're also going to be investing with Samsung. So we have a portfolio, and we're going to stay behind Intel and do everything we can to help them be successful. What they need is customers, by the way. You know, not to get into the weeds here, but in the manufacturing of chips, it's a virtuous cycle. You need a customer to come in so that you can start to manufacture. It's a flywheel. It's a flywheel of innovation and iteration. And so that's why I have spent a lot of time with Tim Cook and Jensen and Lisa Su to say, take a bet on Intel so they can get better at what they're doing.
But isn't there also a danger of picking winners and losers? And is it possible that the CHIPS Act accelerated Intel's problems by putting focus on it?
No, I don't think so. First of all, there's no guarantee that Intel or any of these companies will get the full amount of the grant. So this is hardly a blank check. You know, Intel, let's say they're getting maybe $6 billion, say $6 billion. They don't get a penny until first they clear some milestones. Then they have to do some additional milestones, including technical milestones completed, product milestones completed, getting customers. And then they'll receive a little bit more money. So I hear the question, but I think it's the opposite. We're trying to give them incentives so we're giving them a chance to be successful. If they can't get it done, they won't get the rest of the grant, any of these companies. Mm-hmm.
President-elect Trump raised eyebrows in a recent interview with Joe Rogan on October 25th. He said that the CHIPS Act is a disaster, suggesting it should be scrapped and replaced with tariffs, that subsidies don't work, that tariffs are the only thing that work. Speaker Johnson then echoed that, talked about repeal, then he reversed. What are the implications if the CHIPS and Science Act were to be repealed? Is this a bad idea?
It's a horrific idea. It's a reckless idea. Listen, I used to be a politician. recovering politician. I ran successfully several times, 2-term governor. Sometimes you say things on the stump, and I can only hope that was something to be said on the stump and won't be acted out. If we're in a place in American politics where we can't agree on national security and protecting the people of this country, then that's a very dark place. I will tell you now, whoever is the president, and I'd say it to my own boss, check your politics at the door when you're talking about American national security. It is untenable that the United States of America buys 100% of leading-edge chips used in fighter jets, AI technology, nuclear simulation, drones. 100% of those chips are made in Taiwan, and many of them are tested in China. Do something about it. Fix it. That's what we're doing. That's what the CHIPS Act is doing. So if you want to hold us accountable and say, go faster, be clearer, do a better job, fine. I'll listen to that. But if you want to say, undo it, well, that's not right. It's reckless. It's not fair. And it makes us less safe. By the way, tariffs have their place. Tariffs have their place. Legacy chips right now, I'm looking at my pal Tom Caulfield, who runs a fantastic American company, Global Foundries, making larger, feature-rich chips. Right now, China is subsidizing those chips in these new fabs, dumping them into the global market and tanking the price. That isn't fair, and there may be a case for tariffs on that, so we can compete on a level playing field. But let's just do our job.
Can tariffs alone deal with the chips issue?
No,
Because that's
absolutely
really what President Trump is talking about.
Yeah, 100% no. Absolutely, 100% no.
But what has been your approach to tariffs? Because I think people would be surprised that you've used tariffs. And what about export controls? That you've been in charge of stricter export controls.
Tariffs have their place. I mean,
what's been the most successful tariff that you've implemented or kept in place?
We kept steel and aluminum tariffs in place, for example. China is subsidizing steel and aluminum, dumping it into the global market. We need a vibrant steel industry. We need a vibrant chip industry. Like whenever China, or any country, but it's mostly China, overly subsidizes, we can't compete. We could compete on a level playing field. But it's not a substitute. We need investments in research and development, investments in workforce, investments in infrastructure so we can be great in the US. Export controls. You brought up export controls. I'm looking at Alan Estevez, who runs BIS. I think of export controls as a precision strike, right? So when thinking about being on the battlefield, you have different tools in your toolbox. Export controls are a precision strike. There's certain technologies we have, China wants, deny them. But it doesn't mean cutting off trade with China. That's escalatory, and that hurts America. So we've done huge, most robust, expansive export controls in US history we have done in our tenure. Mostly around semiconductors and semiconductor equipment. And the other thing about export controls is do it with your allies, right? Like you don't go into a war without your allies. Well, don't go into export controls without your allies. It's about US leadership with our allies, working with our allies to deny China the most sophisticated technology we have that they want.
A year ago, you expressed some frustration that industry was taking your export controls and manufacturing right up to the bar. It wasn't really in the spirit of those export controls. Has that changed? What are your frustrations and what do you need from industry?
Yeah, so I've learned that that's the way it works. We set the rules and they comply. So
just under the wire.
Just like this. So a couple things. So then we set the rules again, right? And I just can't say it enough, work with your allies. So it does no good if national security is the North Star, right? So when I set the rules, I have to make damn sure China can't just buy this stuff from Japan or Korea or the Europeans. So that's why we have to work with them. If I had more time in the job, I would try to do a better job having a pitch and catch and a dialogue on a continuous basis with industry. I mean, really, we need them at the table. This technology is incredibly complex. Trying to figure out how to draw the cut line in a way that gets the national security goal but doesn't hurt US industry is really hard. So I think we need a continuous dialogue between the US government and the highest levels of industry to constantly get that right, recognizing there is a tension. My thing is, you can't put a price tag on national security. So if I dig into your profits, such is life.
So it's been said that you are the member of the administration that China fears the most because you control the export controls, tariffs, and you've sat across from the table from the Chinese. Mm-hmm. What have you learned, and what would your advice be for your successor? If it's Howard Lutnick, what would your advice be?
Be tough. Be tough. Be straightforward. Rhetoric is not useful. Rhetoric is not useful. Sit at the table, look them in the eye, tell them where you are, and stick to what you say. Don't back down. But the bravado, I think, is not necessary. Like, here's the way it's going to be. It's matter of fact. It's not in our interest for you to get this technology, so I'm not going to give it to you. Also, my other piece of advice would be think harder about technology. Continue to modernize the department. When I sat here a year ago, the Commerce Department didn't have an AI Safety Institute. We've built an AI Safety Institute in the Commerce Department with some of the world-leading AI researchers and technologists. When I sat here a year ago, we hadn't obligated a single penny of CHIPS money. Now we have $35 billion out the door because I built a team of experts from industry. When we are doing our work for BIS, we're starting to use AI-enabled analytics so we can be better and faster. So I will continue to modernize the department in that way. And then my final thing would be, and I really believe this, I have religion on this topic, export controls matter, sanctions matter, holding China back matters, but it's just a speed bump. We are not going to beat China by trying to slow them down. We're going to beat them by going faster. So invest in America. Invest in our technology, invest in our companies, invest in our infrastructure, invest in our talent, and do it with our allies. The collapse, or that's too strong of a word, but the softening of Europe's economy, the softening of Europe's tech center, that's a problem. So fundamentally, I would say, it's a race. Tug on their shirt where you can to slow them down, but you better just be prepared to run faster.
But you don't believe in decoupling from China?
Absolutely not. Decoupling is a fool's errand. It's escalatory. It hurts America. By the way, they want to decouple. I always smile when people say to me, Secretary, are you trying to decouple from China? Absolutely not. But why do you think they're building 21 new semiconductor factories? Why do you think GM is struggling to sell cars in China and BYD is producing millions of cars a year? They want to decouple. Xi Jinping is very clear. Take Xi Jinping at his word. He wants a dual circulation economy. I think that's bad for the world, and I think it's bad for, certainly America.
How did you respond when you were in China? They tried to humiliate you by rolling out this Huawei smartphone with a 7-nanometer chip. How did you respond? How surprised were you, and what did you do?
Yeah. So they told me not to take it. For those of you who don't know, I was in China, first Commerce Secretary in 6 years to go to China. I went last year over Labor Day weekend, and they used the occasion of my visit to release their new phone, a Huawei phone, with a chip in it that could only have been made if they violated export controls. So my billboards were in Beijing when I was there, releasing the new phone. My son,
They transposed your face on
they transposed my face on the thing. My son's like, Mom, you're famous in China.
on TikTok, perhaps.
Yeah, that's another discussion. Every mother's great worry. But yeah, and the Chinese told me not to take it personally. It was a coincidence.
They didn't allow you to save face?
So I was amused, touche. It was probably not a coincidence. Whatever. Like I played rugby. I'm a politician. I'm unoffendable and get back up when you get knocked down. Look, here's the thing. Our chips are better, our phones are better, and they're better because we're out innovating them. And this past week, we rolled out new export controls, putting 140 Chinese companies on the entity list, and doing everything we can, working with the Dutch and the Japanese, the big deal, to more effectively deny China the tools they need to make the chips that will go in the Huawei phone.
We have a few minutes left. Let's end by talking about Taiwan. President Trump recently said about Taiwan that we put up, and this is a criticism of the CHIPS Act, we put up billions of dollars to rich companies, referring to TSMC. They stole our chip business. They want us to protect them. The mob makes you pay money. He complains that the US is paying TSMC to make chips in America and thinks the same can be achieved, again, as we mentioned, through tariffs. How should we be thinking about Taiwan? You've been a part of kind of war games to see, China's intent with Taiwan is well known. What is your reaction to former President Trump-elect's comments on Taiwan, and what would your approach be to Taiwan, and what is dangerous about this kind of talk?
Yeah. Maybe I'm just too practical, but escalatory rhetoric is just not useful. It benefits no one to have a hot or cold invasion of Taiwan. So, of course we have to be prepared. We have the best military in the world, best intelligence in the world, and we have to be prepared. We also have to be prepared, which is what I'm doing, if God forbid, China cut off the flow of chips to the US from Taiwan. So we have to be eyes wide open about that and do everything we can. But at the same time, we ought to be doing everything we can to de-escalate so it doesn't happen. I think, I can't remember the number, but there's like $1 trillion plus of trade that would come to a screeching halt if there were that kind of a conflict. So I think we just have to, we shouldn't allow it. And we have the ability, working with our allies around the world, to make sure it doesn't happen. One really important point on that, I'm constantly thinking about the future, like how do we innovate in government and modernize government to meet the threats of today? And one thing in that bucket is the Indo-Pacific. The United States, for too long, took our eye off of the ball in the Indo-Pacific. And so I hope the Trump administration has a serious economic strategy in the Indo-Pacific. And if he pulled out of TPP, if it's not going to be TPP, it better be something else. Because if you allow China to totally corner the market in Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, have total access to all those critical minerals, have all of the IT be run on Huawei rails, all the AI be run on Huawei chips. Guys, that's a bad day for national security. So I think it's super important, and it relates to Taiwan. It relates to Taiwan. We need to be stronger in that region, which reduces the probability that that will ever happen.
What are your priorities in the next 2 months? What are you going to try to achieve? What do you have left that is undone, that you're frustrated that you won't have a chance to achieve?
Oh my God, that is such, look, I'll be very honest. Like I'm sad to be leaving because I have a lot more work I want to do. So what I'm trying to do now is just tee it up for the next administration to be successful. I have all these CHIPS Act deals that I need to complete. There's a lot of work. I told you we just this past week, to give you a sense, people are saying, Gina, are you still working? This past week, we made several CHIPS announcements. I announced the result of a Defense Production Act survey into legacy chips, which I want to try to take action on before I leave. Possibly, there's a need for tariffs on legacy chips, as I've said. The AI work has to be done. So there's just a huge amount of work. I've told my team, buckle up, we're working till the 19th at midnight, and I'll have it ready for the next team to take over and not miss a beat.
And in May, you will co-chair the first Reagan National Economic Forum. You seem to be one of a favorite Democrat of the Reagan Library, and a peace through strength Democrat, certainly. So thank you, Gina Raimondo. Thank you to the audience.
Thanks.
Thank you.